Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Medina. I am from Gear Up, Iowa. I'm very excited to be hosting one of the Gear Up coaches that we have. In a moment, I will let her introduce herself. But before we get started, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day and just being here and sharing your experience. So I will let you introduce yourself and we're just gonna have a chat here on Gear Up Coffee Talk.
Yay! I'm so excited to be here, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm in the cool club. So my name is Brittany Beard, and I'm the Gear Up Iowa coordinator at Eastern Iowa Community Colleges. And I've been with Gear Up, it'll be a year actually next month. So I'm a little newer in the field of Gear Up. So, but it's been super amazing experience despite the pandemic we've been in. And so I'm super excited to be joining you this morning.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. When you say Eastern Iowa Community Colleges, we heard the S in there. Is this multiple? I mean, I guess I could answer the question, but I'm going to let you answer that question.
Yes, so we make up an entire district of 3 colleges that include Scott Community College in Davenport, Muscatine Community College, and Clinton Community College. So we have 3 colleges that make up our district.
So you just have to travel in between all of them.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm a traveler now. I am an official legit traveler, but I enjoy it. So it's great.
I'll tell you what, I love traveling. And one thing that, might make me stick out there a little bit is that I truly enjoy driving. So I enjoy driving though at like 1 o'clock in the morning because there's less traffic.
Yeah. Yep.
Just a lot of open road. So
yeah, and you have so much time to think and process and plan in your mind. It's great. It's great like downtime. So I do appreciate that about
it. So what did you find most rewarding about being a coach? I know you've only been in this position for about a year, and given the pandemic, I'm sure that there were some troubles in there, but there's always that silver lining, right? So what was the most rewarding thing and your favorite part about being a Gear Up coach?
So that's a great question. Prior to my position in Gear Up, I was actually in TRIO. So the programs, I consider them like sister programs because they're very, very similar. And I used to be in TRIO when I was an undergrad. So I have been able to identify with a lot of our Gear Up students. And I think that is very rewarding. We have a handful of our students at EICC that are in Gear Up that are first generation college students. And I am a first gen college student. So I'm familiar with some of those obstacles and being in college and, being clueless as far as like how to navigate this and not having family to go to for advice or ask questions or who would understand like when you're studying for multiple tests, So I think that was one of the most rewarding aspects in this role is just to be able to identify with those students and let them know, hey, I'm a first gen too, and this is what got me through, and I think another piece that was really rewarding that is unique to this year is when I got to meet my students in person. Which I have been talking to them this whole year on Zoom. And just recently, maybe last month, I think, I met a handful of them in person. And it was the most exciting moment of my work life this past year. It was so, so exciting. And I've been meeting with more of them in person. So that is definitely by far, and who would have thought I'd be saying that? Like I met my students in person. I've been talking to them on Zoom for a whole year, and it's just so different, when you talk in person. So it is just amazing. I really miss that in-person contact, and I'm starting to get that now. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, there's nothing like being in person. That's definitely for sure. I know that we can do a lot of things virtually now, but there's just that extra layer when you meet someone in person,
Yes.
where you can kind of get a real feel of who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And I'm not gonna lie, like usually when I meet students for the first time, like it's nothing. It's like, hey, how are you? I'm excited to meet you. But well, I was gonna say between us, but other people are gonna be watching this, of course. I was like a little nervous to meet my students in person. It was a little weird. It was just like a little weird. Like, because you only talk to them, from like shoulders up. So I don't know. It was a little weirdness, but like a good little weirdness. But
yeah,
I'm past that now. Like after I saw them for the first time, like I'm past it, and now we're super, super normal feelings.
yeah, and it's great to finally get out there, right? After being in a house or apartment or whatever for the last year. And I'm sure the students likewise of just being on campus and having um, that that sort of organic feel. So now that we're on the topic of COVID and the pandemic, what are the things that you wish you could have seen on campus during this past year for your Gear Up students?
Mm, mm.
I know I got some good questions, girl.
Yeah, that you do. Those are great questions so far. Wow. Some things I would have liked to have seen. I think about our peer mentoring program that we created for Gear Up. That was pretty much 100% virtual, right?
Mhm.
And I never would have thought of a peer mentoring program being virtual.
Tell me how that worked a little bit, because that to me sounds interesting. Like,
It's
how
very
do you
interesting.
mentor someone who's
Yes.
like, oh hey, hi, you're my mentor now?
So interesting. It's a great word to describe it. The gist of our peer mentoring program, because of COVID, a lot of emails were sent, and there are some barriers with that because not all students check their emails, right? And we were using school email. Our peer mentors had to use the school email, so which is kind of another barrier as well. Some students that do check their email, it's usually the personal email. So a lot of communication via email. But our peer mentors, like every other week, they would email their mentees. They had a list of mentees, and they would just encourage them. They would let them know that they're here for them to answer any questions. They would definitely let them know of events that we have coming up. And our peer mentors also held virtual office hours. So that is the unique setup of our virtual peer mentoring. Now, to go back to your other question, I would have loved to have this in person, social events in person, those fun icebreakers where you can actually like touch people or give like a high five or something, or maybe even a hug. I don't know. And have food at these events. What attracts people more than food? And what strikes great conversations more than food, right? Food and fellowship. It's wonderful. Everybody enjoys it. So I would have loved to have that. And our guest speakers, we had some phenomenal guest speakers. We had Harvey Harrington, who's a motivational youth speaker. We had Alvaro Macias from Accenture, who was amazing. He talked a lot about financial literacy. I would love to have those individuals in person speak to our students. So I would definitely say I wish the peer mentoring program could have happened in person, and where the students could meet up in small groups and hang out and do things together. That would have been ideal.
One thing I do remember, just kind of dating myself here a little bit, I used to be in admissions at Eastern Iowa Community Colleges at the Muscatine campus. So shout out to all of my EICC colleagues and friends. But I remember one thing that Chef Brad said is if you feed them, they will come. And
Yes.
to this day, that is what I live by is if I feed them, they will come. So
Yes, if you feed me, I'm there. You know, I'm
right,
totally
right.
there. If you have freebies, I'm there.
Yes, the swag for sure. And everyone loves free food, right? Like,
Mhm.
run and get me a free cupcake. Like,
Exactly.
just stuff
Exactly.
like that in the student center and things like that. It just there's always that extra layer. So I'm really bummed out. But I am thankful that we're starting to kind of open back up. That
Yes.
students are kind of able to feel and get that experience. I almost feel like they're gonna get like a redo over, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hey,
And speaking of like opening back up and food and social events, I'm so excited because I am meeting with one of my students today at Clinton, and we're going to have food and we're going to hang out. So it's happening. It only took a year, but it's happening. And we're actually having Gear Up Lunch and Learns all week at all three campuses. And I have students that are going to be there at each one. So
that
my
is,
heart is so full.
that is
I'm
awesome.
so excited.
That's that. If you don't mind, where in Clinton?
So we are going to meet on campus, and we're probably going to grab some food from Hy-Vee. And if it's not raining, which is supposed to rain today, we might go to one of the parks. What's one of those like famous parks in Clinton? Eagle Point, I think.
Um,
Eagle
I'm
thing.
not really sure. I know that there is a really, really good like deli restaurant that I always go to. I blanked out on the name, but Heather would know.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
so
Heather's going to be there, by the way.
yes,
So
Heather is. We'll talk to Heather later. But uh,
no spoil alerts.
yeah, there you go. So I have a couple quick other questions. Tell me what you've learned about yourself, right? We're sometimes we just focus on out here that we forget that we're also learning at the same time, and
Mhm.
that students teach us things, and even though we don't realize it in that moment, later on we're like, oh, that, yep, yep,
Right.
kind of sits there, and you're like, wow, I really learned from X, Y,
Yeah.
or Z that happened.
Yeah. That's a that's another great question. This one is a little bit more challenging. Um, so you talked a little bit about how our students can kind of like teach us things and we can learn from our students. And there's one particular Gear Up student who's one of our peer mentors. And I feel like she called me out one day, like in a really, really, really great way. And it really challenged me. And in one of our one-on-one meetings, she asked me a question while I was talking with her, and she was disclosing how she felt like she was going through depression and she was just in a really dark time and she was struggling in school and some personal relationships. And so it was a pretty tough conversation we had. And a few meetings later, we were talking, she was feeling better, her spirits were high. And she asked me, Brittany, how are you doing? And that caught me off guard because, well, I don't really think about that much. And students really don't ever ask me that. So I was very encouraged by that question. And also, I felt really challenged. And I was like, oh, how am I doing? So I appreciate that student so much. And so, one thing I would say that I learned is that I need to be more vulnerable with my students, and I was a little bit. I disclosed to my students that I too was seeing a counselor at one point, and I encouraged them to take advantage of those free resources that we have at EICC. And I'm like, I can't just talk the talk, you know, I got to walk the walk. And I know I can benefit from seeing a counselor. So I disclose that to my students. But when she asked me, you know, how I was doing, I don't know if I was really vulnerable with her, you know, and there's been so much going on this past year, you know, with social, racial injustice and, you know, the pandemic and just, you know, all the losses we've experienced. And there's just been so much. So looking back, I wish I would have been more vulnerable with her and told her like a little bit of what I'm going through and how I'm feeling, because I think students really appreciate that, you know. They know we're human, but we don't always show that, right?
Right.
So that's one thing that I learned. And so going forward, I want to be more vulnerable with my students. Like if there are clearly things that are going on that are impacting the entire world, like I need to be honest and like, you know what, today's not a good day. I struggled getting up this morning, or, you know, I'm feeling really sad right now. You know, I want to be more vulnerable with them. And I know that they would appreciate that. And I appreciate when people are open and vulnerable. So
Right.
that is, I would have to say, something that I learned through this year in Gear Up.
Yeah, and thank you for touching on the mental health. You know, that's been a
Mhm.
really big buzzword
Yeah.
this past year. But what does that mean, and how we all do it is very differently. Something that I've told my wife is everyone needs therapy. I think everyone can
Yeah.
benefit from therapy. You know, and just kind of being able to shake that stigma, and say, you
Absolutely.
know, therapy is normal, let's normalize
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
So I definitely appreciate you, you know, telling your students like, hey, this is a thing that I do,
Hmm.
I'm not ashamed about it, and just that
Yeah.
authentic piece about it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right, that's all the time that we have. So, Brittany, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. On behalf of everyone at Gear Up, we appreciate everything you've done for the students. And, you know, we encourage you to, you know, keep learning like we tell our
Yes.
students, you know.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Have a good one.